So my name is Walter Mahone. I'm the Deputy Chief of our Special Investigations Division at the Attorney General's Office. You're not here to hear from me today, well, at least not until after lunch. Hopefully everybody comes back after lunch. So these gentlemen to my left, first we have Paul Davis. Paul is the Chief Information Officer at the Attorney General's Office, where he leads cutting-edge initiatives in cybersecurity and technology innovation. Paul has a background in electronics repair and a degree in computer science and software engineering. From a personal level, I depend on Paul a lot at the AG's office. From the law enforcement side, I'm a computer guy, but Paul knows everything about computers. So Paul is a huge help to me and everybody. Next, we have Chad Johnson. Chad's bio is very long. Chad's very experienced in this field, so I'll give everybody a snippet, but please read about Chad's bio in your pamphlet. So Chad works for CISA, and he is the Cybersecurity State Coordinator for Arkansas, Region 6. He's focused primarily on critical infrastructure and efforts to manage cyber risk here in the state of Arkansas. And prior to that, Chad spent 12 years as an analyst embedded in a cyber squad at the FBI in Little Rock. Chad also spent 8 years in the Army as an all-source intelligence analyst and completed 2 tours in Iraq. Chad has a Master of Science in Cybersecurity and another master's, I was making sure I was right, another master's in Management Information Systems, and of course a bachelor's in Business Administration. Next we have James Gentry. James is the Chief Information Officer at the City of Fort Smith, and he moved here 2 years ago, and prior to that he was in Alaska. We had a long conversation about Alaska yesterday, and I envy him almost every day. James has a wealth of experience after 20 years in the IT world with the City of Fairbanks, the Northborough School District. So we're very happy to have him. I get on a lot of meetings with James, and I hear he always has a lot of input and a lot of good things to bring up. And last, we have Gary Vance down there. Gary is a wealth of knowledge in the cyber defense field and is currently here at the state of Arkansas as our CISO. And please, again, read Gary's bio in your pamphlet, but I've had the experience and the pleasure of working with Gary on projects and at the AG's office, and I have to say the state of Arkansas is fortunate to have Gary leading the state in cybersecurity. Okay, so first we're going to start with Paul. Paul, I've seen the amazing work you've done at the AG's office in keeping our information safe, but what I've really loved to see from Paul is Paul has created a culture, a cybersecurity culture at the Attorney General's office. Can you give us an overview of what cybersecurity is and why it's crucial for protecting our information and our devices from cyber threats?
Yeah, so cybersecurity is kind of a rabbit hole. If I was to go down everything we do, everything we protect, I'd be here all day. So I think an easier way to approach it is to think of what are the bad guys going after. And they're going after your data. Now there's a lot of ways to get to the data, but at the end of the day, if you focus on what they're going after, which is your data, how can you protect that? And the most valuable piece of information they're going to go after are credentials, passwords, stuff like that. So to protect that on your devices, things like antiviruses, anti-malware, those will help, but really you want to set up things like multi-factor authentication and just being aware of what they're going after. If you know what they want, you know how to protect it. And so building that understanding and that culture is super vital to protecting what they're after.
And Chad, CISA's reach is vast in the cyber world, and hopefully everybody here has learned, if you didn't exactly know what CISA was doing, but hopefully everybody's learned exactly what y'all do. But can you explain the basics of cybersecurity from the CISA standpoint?
Sure. again, everything Paul said, but for us, our focus is critical infrastructure, those 16 sectors out there that you've heard all about, right? The electricity, the water, healthcare. So we talk about it a lot, like CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Confidentiality, yes, we see that they're after a lot of data, right? Whatever your crown jewels are, those services, those critical services that you have, that if that was to go down, would stop you from being able to provide whatever service your organization does. But those last two parts of the CIA are really important for critical infrastructure, the integrity of that data. So, water, wastewater systems, if they can get in and switch the chemical makeups, right? And that availability just, is your power on? Is water coming out the taps? So, again, for us, yes, data is absolutely important. Again, every organization is different. Your crown jewels are different in different organizations, but that CIA is really important for critical infrastructure.
Thank you. James, we've heard a lot. One of the big things the AG talks about is passwords. I think everybody heard, don't make your password password. James, can you talk about why we're constantly having to update our passwords on social media, our phones, our work devices? I think Paul makes me update mine every day. Tell us the role that strong, unique passwords, and please talk about password managers play into cybersecurity, and discuss the benefits as well, this is a big question, of multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, no problem. Passwords, y'all. You've heard it repeated many times during the summit here so far. There are a lot of companies, big companies, that are pushing for a password-less environment, utilizing things called passkeys and that sort of stuff, but we're not there yet. So in today's environment, we still have to have strong passwords. It is one of the key things to protecting yourself and your data. Now, one of the questions I've got, do I really have to have a unique password at every single site I go to? I'm shopping here, I've got my email over there, I've got 3 different email accounts. Yeah, you really do need to have a unique password, not just a recycled one with like 1 digit changed. You need to have unique passwords at every single site. Now, for me, I've got, I'm not going to show you my password store, but I have an encrypted password store because I've got about 400 or 500 passwords. That's not manageable without having a password manager. So there's various products out there that you can search, but one of the important things is to get a password manager that is encrypted, because obviously if you lose your device, let's say you have it on your phone and you lose the phone, you don't want everyone having all your passwords. So unique passwords, have a password manager, because it can be a lot for some of us. And finally, as far as protecting your logins, multi-factor authentication is absolutely huge. We heard Director Easterly and some others talk about the multiple things that you can be doing. I get it. Multi-factor authentication can come across as just another line of red tape, another thing you've got to do to complicate your life, but it's worth it. And honestly, once you're used to it, if you're not already using MFA across the board, I highly encourage that you do. And once you're used to it, it actually simplifies things. But that piece of protection, having another factor to authenticate, to get to your data, to get to your personal life, to get to your business, to get to whatever you're protecting, that multi-factor authentication is absolutely critical. So.
All right. Thank you, James. Gary, can you tell us the dangers of recycled passwords? And I also want you to talk about how attackers are using our general password vulnerabilities to attack us.
Sure. So, I tend to take a practical approach, and for those of you that know me and work with me fairly well, I put a premium on cyber defense in general. I think we, as individuals, as entities, as businesses, as public and private, you have to take a maniacal focus on cyber defense, which means you as an individual have to take a maniacal focus. So I've always looked at it this way. A door left open is a door that can be walked through, okay? And I use these analogies because it's so similar to what happens in the lack of cyber defense and cyber controls and things that we are in control of. My neighbors leave their garage door open and they come and tell me they were broken into and, you know, their bicycles were stolen. Well, you left the door open, right? So similar with password, with password vulnerabilities, if you don't protect your passwords, and James really covered all the technical details of it, you know, use a complex password, but more than that, use a password generator. They generate strong passwords, and these passwords that are created by password generators, if you look at the algorithm of how long it takes software to break a password, it's beyond what you can comprehend of how long it would take to break a highly complex password. So that one step is you closing a door that could otherwise be walked through.
Thank you, Gary. As somebody who breaks passwords often for a living, I can tell you that the shorter passwords, especially on your phone, the 111 or whatever low number, they're easier to get into. We've done it, and luckily we put people in jail because of it, but other people are doing it for other reasons. So Paul, I often talk to you about what you're seeing on our email servers, just the general IT at the AG's office, and talking about threats almost on a daily basis. Can you talk about common cyber threats such as viruses, malware, phishing, what have you?
Yeah, and I'll kind of start from an admin side, the lowest threat to the highest. But from the individual, one of the things I saw a lot in a past job, I used to work for Geek Squad for about 5 years. And every day, people would come in and say, oh, I was just browsing a recipe, and all of a sudden I got a pop-up from Microsoft, so I think I have a virus. Well, the first thing is a virus isn't going to announce itself. It'd be pretty bad as a virus. The second thing is never ever call a number that pops up. To give an analogy, if I wore a Ford Polo and approached you in the Walmart parking lot and said, hey, your car's got a recall, you should probably give me those keys, I'll take care of it for you, you're probably not going to give me those keys. So the same approach should be taken when you're browsing online. If you're just looking somewhere and all of a sudden you're getting a pop-up, or sometimes you'll see you've been looking at illicit material, give us money or we're not going to tell, never call a number. If you are suspicious, find someone trusted that you know, someone in person, someone like the Geek Squad or a computer repair, and just make sure pretty much anytime you see that, just close it out, restart your computer, and that's the best way to get out of there. Now, as far as malware goes, malware is a pretty broad category. Things like Trojans, viruses, ransomware. They're just any code or software that's malicious. The easiest way to protect against those is to keep your systems up to date. When you get those annoying pop-ups, I know other people have talked about at this conference, make sure you're applying those. At our office, every single day I'm updating software because every single day from organizations like CISA, I'm getting alerts that Google Chrome has a vulnerability and you better patch that right now. So keeping things up to date, that's the things that are being exploited on your device. So make sure you're installing those. But the biggest threat we face at our office, because we're doing those patches, we're keeping up to date, is really phishing. And we'll talk a little bit more on that a little later, but phishing it's a lot easier to trick a person than it is to trick a computer. So these social engineering attacks, they're going to go after, you just saw Thomas mention how he was fooled with it. There's nothing wrong with that. They're very good at tricking you. Just make sure you're being extra vigilant, and like you said, when some of those questions got a little more iffy, that's when he backed out. So always be, even if you think it's a trusted source, even if you get an email from someone you've emailed before, they may not even know their email is compromised. So always be suspicious, always be checking things especially if there's links or attachments. But that's essentially the largest threat that we face in our organization is phishing.
Thanks, Paul. I do want to say Paul still has his badges from Geek Squad in his office, and often whenever we go down there, we like to give him a little grief about it. Chad, can you follow up on what Paul said and let us know some of the common threats that CISA and the federal government are seeing from your side?
Okay, sure. So first of all, who thinks their organization is too small to target? Right, I hear that a lot, especially with small businesses, small municipalities, small schools. You know, why would they target little old me? Well, they may not necessarily be targeting you directly, but like our director mentioned through like our vulnerability scans, they're just scanning the internet, right? And you've got unpatched things, and that's how they find it. But I want to really reiterate the foreign threat, advanced, we call them like the advanced persistent threat actors is what we call them. The Chinas, the Russias, the Irans, large criminal groups. It's not always foreign actors. But so, yes, you're absolutely a target, whether it's to ransomware you or other reasons to target a small entity is because you may not be the end target. First of all, they may be testing out new malware or new techniques on you because a smaller entity likely has fewer resources. So if they can't get through your defenses, well, they're probably not going to get into a bigger target, right? So you're a test bed. Another is you are likely not the end goal. Like our director talked about Volt Typhoon China, the goal is to embed in all of our critical infrastructure. It's not to go in and steal your intellectual property, personal identifying information. It's to go in and go to sleep, and then a time of China's choosing, for whatever reason, they decide to come active. So they may be using you to hop into a more important entity. And so you can block all the Chinese and Russian IP addresses you want, and that's great. But a lot of these advanced actors, they're not coming directly from a Chinese IP address or a Russian IP address. Why? Because a lot of people are blocking them. They're going to compromise you because most organizations aren't blocking US IP addresses, right? Because that's who they do business with. So they're masking where they're coming from. They're renting virtual private servers around the world, and they're making these hops coming from China, Russia, wherever, Africa, and they make these hops, and eventually they land at like a virtual private server or you as a victim in the US, and that's how they mask where they're coming from. So yes, you may not be the end goal. You may be, but quite often they're using smaller entities to get to critical infrastructure.
Thank you, Chad. James, as the CIO in Fort Smith, you deal with and handle and secure a lot of people's personal information, whether it be the police department, water, sewage, what have you. So in the cyber world, we can't do our jobs with others, as we demonstrated, and we have meetings with all of these people. Would you give us some information on how to report cybersecurity incidents and where to seek help if somebody believes they've been a victim of a cyber attack?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would like to encourage everyone on is if you have been a victim, if you have clicked the link, if you have been taken advantage of, one of the things that my team and I are setting a culture in Fort Smith is don't be embarrassed. You've heard a lot about AI. You've heard a lot about how sophisticated attacks are becoming. It's going to happen, right? So the most important thing you can do is report it. And the second step of that is that time is of the essence. You know, when you click a link and let's say there have been funds that have been transferred, you have a window of time that you need to get this reported so that there's a chance you can mitigate the damage, decrease the damage done. So the first encouragement here is report it. Don't be embarrassed. It happens to everyone. I've almost clicked on things too and had to back out. The prior speaker talked about the same thing. So report, report, report. Now, who do we report to? If your organization has an IT department, if you've got a cybersecurity department, obviously you're gonna want to start there. If you are that individual and you're like, well, wow, this is a big event, this is a big incident. Who do I talk to? This gentleman right here. You can reach out to CISA. You can go to the FBI's site. If you Google IC3, the letter C, the number 3. Google that. It's going to take you, a link will come up to take you to the Internet Crime Complaint Center. I think I got that acronym correct. And that is a really good place to start, because then the FBI will route your specific incident to the proper people. Law enforcement, I think we've got some law enforcement in the room. Depending on the type of incident, you can go to your law enforcement and talk to them as well. Now, the final component of this that I wanted to mention about reporting and seeking help. On the reporting side, if you are a government entity, if you're in the public sector in Arkansas, you have to report. It is law that you have to report to legislative audit. Okay, so keep that in mind. And if you're not familiar with that, I've had to report a couple of email compromises. I can explain where that is. You can Google it as well if you have questions. But keep in mind that if you do have an incident, once you've reported, once you've sought help, you then need to make sure, public sector folks, that you're reporting it to legislative audit.
Thank you. Before I move on to Gary, Chad, will you follow up on that, some of the resources that CISA has to offer for people who have been the victim of an attack?
Sure. So we are preventative. We're not going to come and remediate your systems, right? So that's not what we do. But here's the importance of reporting. And when we talk to people about that, in theory, everybody says, yes, reporting of cyber incidents is great, right? Because you already heard it's, like that neighborhood watch program. But in practice, it just doesn't happen a lot. And you will always be anonymized. We will never, ever call out the victim. But we need those indicators of compromise, like those IP addresses, email accounts, those things that link back to specific threat actors. And so we can take those and we build these reports, like the Volt Typhoon report that you see. Well, that was an accumulation of lots of reporting. We don't just come up with this stuff out of the air. A lot of this comes from you all reporting, and that's how we get it to other entities to help protect them. So yes, CISA, the FBI, we don't really care where you report. We just ask that you do. But just know that you are the victim. We are always going to treat you as a victim, and we will always anonymize that data. We will never, ever publish you as a victim.
Great. Thank you. Gary, I've toured the server rooms and some of the information centers for the state of Arkansas, and they are beyond impressive. Would you please explain the importance of regular data backups and how to avoid data loss in the event of either a cyber attack or even a hardware failure?
Sure. So the first thing I would say in a large data center, enterprise or a data center environment, you've got to start with a business continuity and a disaster recovery plan that dictates to you how you meet the goals for recovering your business. And in the state data center, we obviously want to be able to recover through system loss or through some other interruption. We set some tight parameters around recovery so that those agencies that depend on the state network and the state data center, we can not only recover those quickly, but we can use the data from backup to restore their services so there's minimal loss of data and minimal disruption to data. But another point I want to make about data backups, there's another entity out there that data backups are really, really important to, and those are ransomware adversaries. You have to protect your backup environment. You'll hear terms called air gapping or separation, network segmentation, micro-segmentation. The bottom line is you want your backup environment protected from your enterprise or your production environment. The first place a ransomware adversary goes to when they have established some level of command and control in your environment is they're going to go for your backups. Because when they get your backup, they now have leverage over you because you can't recover your business without tremendous loss of making a decision to bear the expense of recovering on your own or considering to pay the ransom to recover your environment. So two things, backups, obviously, you can't recover your business without a good backup environment. But secondly, you've got to make sure you protect and defend your backup environment for not only just recovering business, but it takes an option away from a ransomware adversary because you really do take their leverage away when they can't get to your backups.
Thank you, Gary. Paul, you deal with a lot of data at the AG's office. Can you kind of follow up on what Gary said and talk about the importance of backups?
Yep. And at the AG's office, we actually utilize some of the services that they provide in order to do backups because they have such a robust system. To expand upon it, beyond just from an enterprise perspective or from a business perspective, which is obviously important, as an individual, it's also important to back up your data because of a hardware event. Maybe your phone gets dropped in the lake or something like that and you want to protect that data. So the biggest recommendation I have is what's called the 3-2-1 backup system. That's 3 copies of your data and 2 different storage devices, one of them being off-site. Statistically, it's very unlikely that all 3 of those are going to go out. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a great starting point, and for the most part, you'll be protected from that. And so an example of what that could look like, if you've got documents on your computer that you want to back up, the computer is one location, and then something like an external hard drive, most of them come with a backup software. That would be a second location, and then a cloud service provider, OneDrive or Google Drive, that would be the third location. And in that process, you've just fulfilled 2 and 3. You've got 2 different storage media, and you've also got one off-site using the cloud storage. So something as simple as that is a great way to protect your data. And you can go even beyond that. Personally, I've probably got 5 or 6 copies of important data for me. So starting from there is a great point. And then I will say if you use something like an external hard drive plugged in, you've kind of got 2 options. If you're rigorous about it, leave it unplugged and make sure to regularly plug it up and back up. But you kind of run the risk of if you don't do that frequently, you may not have the most up-to-date backups. So it just kind of depends on your personal engagement with it. Because if you leave it plugged in and your computer gets compromised, like Gary said, one of the first things they're going to go after is your backups. They're going to jump right into that drive and try to encrypt that data as well. If it's physically disconnected, they can't get to it. And so you can roll back and recover to a more safe location.
Thank you. Chad, one of the most common cyber attacks we see at work, we see at home, is phishing. CISA has videos, publications, I think we saw one yesterday, about phishing. So could you explain to us briefly how to spot phishing emails, the dangers of clicking on suspicious links, and the importance of not sharing information?
Sure. So, you've all heard before, like AI, right, is crafting these perfect emails, right? So, yes, a lot of these you can still, there's bad grammar in there, but that's going away. So, some things to look at is obviously in the to line, right? But you can spoof these. These email addresses can be spoofed. Let's say you're somebody in finance and a bad actor has got into your email and they're monitoring that. Well, they're looking for somebody you do business with, and they're going to create a domain name, a website that's very similar to yours, right? They may add an Inc. or an LLC or something to it that's very similar because you're likely not to catch it. So you've got to look at where these are coming from, right? That's key. Never ever click the links in an email, and I'm sure you all hear that. But if you want to know where that link really goes, you can hover over it, you can right-click, copy it, paste it into a Word doc and see what really link is embedded in there. Because, I can name it Amazon.com or Walmart.com, and I can put anything under that link that I want. So just because it says Walmart.com or Amazon.com does not mean that's where you're going. So obviously your best thing is always to go to a website, whether it's, PayPal says, hey, verify this data, or, your FedEx package is coming, go to that website physically and type those things in. And again, especially for like business email compromises, if you're like finance people that can pay the bills, that phone number in the bottom is not their phone number. It is a bad guy phone number. And quite often, those phone numbers, these threat actors, these big criminal groups, they are structured like any legitimate business. And they have a customer service department. And you're going to call that number, and it is going to be the bad actors that are going to answer that and say, yes, we sent it to you. So, no, find a known good phone number, and just like a known good website that you're going to physically type in and call to verify.
Great, thank you. And we've seen at the AG's office, we've had emails that come in, sometimes to our HR department asking to, change banking information or what have you, and they're coming from what look like legitimate businesses. We've seen a doctor in New York who had her email compromised. Recently we had a lady who makes cookbooks in North Dakota. Her email was compromised, and they're coming into the AG's office. So it's very common, exactly what Chad was just talking about. So speaking of phishing, Paul, we've talked, and again, I brought up the culture you've created at the AG's office. Can you talk about threat monitoring that you're doing, the threat analysis, and tell us how you've built, that phishing awareness culture?
Yep. So one of the biggest threats we run into, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is we can start securing things and implementing some of the best practices, and that protects a lot. But phishing is probably by and large the largest threat we run into every day. I mean, we're getting tons of phishing emails, and you can do things like setting up email filters. Some of my staff probably hate because a lot of emails go to quarantine because it's a little overly cautious, but I'd rather be more cautious than under cautious. And some of these emails that get caught in the quarantine are legitimate phishing, and I'll look at them when I'm choosing to approve it or not, and they'll sometimes stump me, and I'll have to go to the person receiving the email and say, can you call whoever you're expecting this email from? We need to verify what's going on because this just looks a little suspicious. Or I'll just tell them, this person said this and not release it because it may have a malicious link or content or something like that. So one of the other threats we really run into is some people will be compromised and they won't even know it. We can have filters that if something is sent from our domain, arkansasag.gov, we have records out there that most email filters will respect, where if it comes from us, it has to come from our IP addresses, places that we trust. So that helps a lot with spoofing. But if somebody gets into the email system that we have and they've harvested those credentials and they're able to get in there and start sending emails on behalf of that user, that's going to punch right through any sort of filter that the other organizations have. Even just recently, maybe a week or two ago, one of our partners, I'll say that instead of vendors after Thomas's speech, one of our partners, we email pretty frequently. And so when their email got compromised, they go through and they'll look, who was this person emailing? What were they emailing them about? And so I got an email from somebody I've talked to previously saying, I've shared a document with you, it's receipts and invoices. That was the first thing that alerted me, is anything talking about invoices, financial data, they're trying to stir a sense of urgency. That ended up being that person's email is compromised. And they'll be a little sneaky about it. They had the same signature with the emails they're sending out that person normally had. So it's always important to always be suspicious. Like I said, don't click on any links, open any attachments. If you're receiving something unsolicited from someone even that you know, make sure to call and verify with them. And don't call the number that they list in their signature. Go to someone who knows it if you've talked to them before. Just always verify that information, because that increasingly is becoming how we're seeing people get through our filters. Because we can look for grammatical errors or unregistered domains, new accounts, but if it's from a known good person, like if someone were to get into my email, you would trust it if it came from me. So that always be suspicious.
Now, at the AG's office, are you still running the fake phishing emails around the office, or can you tell me that?
Yeah, so something we started implementing a little more recently was phishing campaigns. So we will send out, based off of the threats that I'm seeing, if I'm seeing a lot of a specific type of phishing or something that I think is a weakness that we've run into, we'll send fake phishing and we'll use those common things that we're seeing. And then the best way for staff to learn, or for anybody to learn, is through a mistake, but gently. So, if they click it, this is a safe environment where we can correct them and teach them in that moment through some sort of video or education that here's what that email was, this was phishing, and if they report it, to reward it. Some of the things we're working on, I think, I got this idea from DIS, is starting to do some sort of competitions based around it, just something to make it more engaging, because I know if I'm to send out an email every month, hey, here's what phishing could be, I'm convinced a lot of people have rules that if it comes from me, just send it to red and they don't look at it, because I'm emailing all the time about threats we're seeing. So the phishing campaigns have been very successful. I've been impressed with our staff's performance. So that's good. I think that's just because they're a bunch of lawyers and they're always suspicious. But that's a good way to train if you're in charge of an organization.
Well, thanks. And I've told everybody in our cybercrimes unit that if you click on one of the phishing campaigns that Paul sent around, you will never hear the end of it. Because I know Paul will probably send an all-staff email out that one of the cybercrimes agents successfully clicked a link. So let's move on to mobile device security. James, I would imagine the City of Fort Smith employees have a lot of devices that they take home, whether it be tablets, computers, cell phones. So one of the big problems you face, and I'm sure a lot of people on the stage face, and I hear, is you can't always be the one, you don't always have access to them. You can't always be securing them, especially if they're in a car, they're at home. So can you tell us some of the best practices for securing those devices whenever people are taking them home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, there's really two components. There's the personal, like, I've got my personal cell phone. And then for those of us at larger institutions, businesses, you can have a business phone. So what can we do at the personal level? Have a screen lock, have a passcode that you have to type in. It's pretty straightforward, but a lot of us, we got pictures of our kids, our families, we've got a password store, we've got a large part of our lives are on these devices. So you need to take that seriously for your own personal protection. So getting that screen lock on there are options depending on your device to have a more complex one, and don't just have 1111. We've heard that, right? Have some sort of a code that means something to you, but probably not your kid's birthday that somebody can get online potentially. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I would recommend is being discerning about the applications that you put on your devices. All right, there are a lot of apps out there that are all about stealing your data. All right, and you need to be discerning about that. We all do, because you install that app and then it asks you. I installed a game a couple of years ago, and then it's like, hey, we want access to your contact list. We want this, that, and the other thing. Do you approve? And I'm like, no. I'm not going to give you access to all of that. So you have to be discerning and be careful about what apps you're putting on there, and just don't be too overly trusting. I don't want you to be paranoid, but be aware and be careful what apps you're putting on there. Now, more on the business side, for those of us in large institutions, there is. I'm going to date myself here. But there's this an old phone company ad, and it was reach out and touch someone, right? Okay, so For those of us, fortunate enough to have cybersecurity teams, an IT team, or no matter where you're at, there's something called mobile device management. Many of you may have heard of it. It's called MDM, mobile device management. That is your ability to be able to reach out and touch this device. So at the school district, we had a very robust MDM in Fairbanks, and we had the ability to reach out and lock a device down. I had to do it a few times. I had a teacher call up frantically, "Oh no, I left my district phone at the airport. Please help, I'm so sorry." And we'll just, a few keystrokes, reach out, touch the device. It now has just a screen when you turn it on that says, property of the school district, please return, call this number. And that's, basically you're bricking the device, and then once it's returned, you can recover it. Both personal and professional, one thing you can do as well is make sure that the data that's on these devices is encrypted so that they can't just dump the data. All right, I don't want to get too technical into the weeds, but encrypt the data, have a passcode. If you're with an agency, an organization, take a look at MDM if you don't have it. I think that would be, those would be the three strongest.
I want to follow up on something James said. So in our division, we work internet crimes against children. And James brought up the schools being able to access their devices. So one of the big problems we face, especially during COVID, a lot of schools didn't have the Chromebooks that they were passing out to all the students. So that's newer. That's what it is now. All the kids have Chromebooks, they have iPads, and from the law enforcement side, we found it very difficult, especially during COVID, to get access to those devices. A lot of them run on flash media. We couldn't do forensics on them. But luckily, the schools have kind of caught up, and they have figured out that the kids are not always doing their homework on these computers, and they have also figured out that the kids can get around security features on Chromebooks. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's huge for people in my field, and hopefully if there's people in schools around here, just know that the security measures you're putting on those Chromebooks, what have you, are very important. Next, I want to talk about software updates. Gary, we often hear, the newest Apple update, Android update, Windows update. We're constantly having to update in work and in life. So can you tell us why we're having to always update, and explain some of the security vulnerabilities that happen if we don't update?
Sure. So most of our, what I would call our primary service providers, our vendors, whatever term you want to use, the reason you see the request for update fairly frequently is because the threat landscape is changing that quickly. It literally is changing daily. And most of these tier one companies that we all are aware of, they do a very good job of paying attention to the threat landscape and making sure they're releasing updates to their service to, protect from attack. So it's very, very important that you understand when these update requests are coming through, but it's also important to understand what's in the update itself. There are times when an update can cause more problems than it can solve, and so you have to take a risk-aware approach, and not always just say, well, okay, they're asking me to update or upgrade, I'm going to do that. On the flip side of that, I can tell you the state of Arkansas has had more than our share of ransomware events, and the one single common denominator across all of them was an update or a patch that had not been performed. And so the adversary exploited that. They go for known vulnerabilities, right? They want the easiest path that they can take to exploit, and so they already have the known vulnerabilities at their disposal. And so when vendors and providers release patches and updates that will close these vulnerabilities, we need to be very prudent and judicial in applying those updates and patches as they come through.
Thank you, Gary. James, I want to go back to you about social media. So everybody uses social media. Is there anybody in here who doesn't use social media? Okay, that's like 5. Okay, I thought there'd actually be some more. So government agencies are using social media. Private citizens, of course, are using social media. We're seeing it. It's of course bigger now than it ever has. Can you tell us about keeping our social media accounts safe? Talk about what happens if they're hacked and understanding the privacy settings with social media.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot here to unpack, but really the beginning of this is the warning. I think most of us in here are aware. If you put something online, even if you've locked down your social media account properly, as we're going to talk about, if you put it online, at some level, you should probably consider whatever you've put out there, it's public domain. So be careful what you're putting out there on social media, whether it's for your business, for your institution, or personally. Just, again, be diligent and be really careful what you're advertising about yourself, your kids, your business out there. So there, depending on which social media platform you have, there's multiple different things that you can do to make your account more secure. One of the really big things is to not let your friends list be visible to the general public. There are things that you can do, again, depending on the platform, to go through, and you can limit it. In most of the platforms, you can limit who can see that you're friends with. So, if I'm friends with Chad, I don't want everybody to know that we have a connection there, general public-wise. Oftentimes, what I will do is I will I'll let my friends see who my friends are. But personally, I also am thinking about, no, nobody needs to see all of my connections. Now, on platforms like LinkedIn, having those connections can be powerful. So that would be the one caveat to this. But again, by and large, be careful what you're putting out there, and lock down your friends list. There are different privacy settings, again, depending on your platform, outside of friends list, about the audience that you're posting to. So, I'm working hard to not name specific platforms, but there are things you can do to say, okay, if you've set up your groups, and this takes work. This takes work, y'all. You need to go through, spend the time to understand them. It's not overly complex. It just takes time. So go through, and you can set up like friend groups. So I can have a work group. I can have a family group. I can have an acquaintances group. And then when you're getting ready to post, hey, birthday pics from my kid's birthday, that's only for family. You can select that it only goes to that audience. So really, it's about learning the platform. You've got to get into all of them, call them privacy settings, security settings, account settings. Take your time, go through there, be diligent, and then at the end of the day, even if you've taken these steps, be careful what you're putting out there.
I've been sending a friend request to James for, I feel like, a year now. He just hasn't accepted my Facebook friend request yet. I'm trying to get in one of those groups. Okay, so this is going to be the last question I've got for each one of you. So, the goal of this panel was to talk about home and work and maintaining our devices and having good cybersecurity practices. So will each one of you give me your number one piece of advice when it comes to securing our devices at home and work. Starting with Paul.
So I'll give you 2 for 1. 1 for home, 1 for work, in the spirit of the panel. The one thing I'd recommend for everybody to do when they go home, and this is for the home one, if you don't have a password manager yet, especially if you have an iPhone, update. iOS 18 was just released. It comes with a password manager built in. It's already kind of had one, but they've exposed it through its own app called Passwords. Very easy to use. I personally use it. I can share passwords with family members. That way, if I've got a utility login that has a random string of characters, my wife and I can both log in a secure way by using that password manager. So for home, that's the number one thing. Go home, update your phone, start playing around with the Passwords app. It's very easy to use, and that's one of the best things you can do to secure your accounts. For work, as a head of IT, we're your friends. The biggest thing I want to say is it may be different for different organizations, but we try to be as friendly as we can. We know that technology can be complicated, but it's our job to help bridge that gap, to help you understand it. Make sure if you have any questions, we're taking care of you. So don't be afraid of us. We don't bite. So come talk to us if you have any questions, and especially if there is something like a phishing and you've clicked something, tell us right away. We're not going to make fun of you unless maybe your job is to not click on links, but we'll be patient with you and take care of it.
Thank you, Paul. IT is definitely our friend at the AG's office, so they're your friend too.
So I would say one thing we ask when we go talk to a lot of organizations is, where do you get your threat intelligence from, right? Where are you getting that information? How are you keeping up with the current threats? So this is for work and home, whether you've been in cybersecurity for a long time or you're brand new and you think you don't know anything about it. Go out to the internet and just go to Google and search the top 50 cybersecurity email lists. Pick a couple of those and sign up. That way you're going to get in your email, spend 5 minutes through one of these services that you sign up for, 5 minutes a day, and read one cybersecurity article. It's it, 5 minutes a day. If you're advanced in cyber, yeah, you probably need to spend a little more time than that, but for somebody newer, again, 5 minutes in a month from now, 3 months from now, you'll be surprised how much you have learned, whether it's the current things that are going on that may affect you at work or your family at home, right? Things, whether it's your children or your devices. 5 minutes isn't much time. In 3 months from now, you'll hear something on the news, or you'll read an article on one of the news sites, and you're going to say, I know what they're talking about, right? The goal is not to make you an advanced cyber defender, but it's just to keep you updated with the things that are going on in the world related to cyber, and that will go so far.
Thank you. That's a good point about the articles. I often read about them on LinkedIn. I'm sure there's a lot of people on LinkedIn. Somebody sent me a request on LinkedIn since I've been up here, so whoever you are, I'll find you after. But that is a great point. There's good articles, and it's constantly changing, so thank you. James?
Yeah, so in the law enforcement world, there's a term that is heard often, and that term is situational awareness. You may, if you have friends, if you are in law enforcement, you've probably heard that. Another way of saying it is keep your head on a swivel, always be looking around. I think one of the most important things, and every member of the panel has kind of talked about this, be aware of your surroundings. And in the digital landscape, you need to have situational awareness in that digital landscape. And I want to take a second and give a shout out to Attorney General Griffin. Having this kind of event and all of you being here is being aware of your surroundings, being aware and realizing the importance of it. But being careful out there and realizing that you're not alone. So be aware and realize you're not alone. You heard General Griffin and Director Easterly talk about collective defense. You're not alone. You've got people you can call. We have been able to send mutual aid to other organizations in time of need. So be aware, and you're not alone.
Great, thank you. And to reiterate that, you're not alone. that nobody knows everything, and there's always somebody you can call. In the forensics world, things are constantly moving and changing, and I'm on a few listserv, and, you know, we can ask questions and things like that. So always reach out, you know, to your peers. All right, Gary?
Yeah, so I heard a term a long time ago that goes like this: if you can see it, you can breach it. And so what that means to me is you have to understand your attack surface, both personally and in business. And it's not likely that you're going to protect anything that you can't defend. If you do not have proper cyber controls in place to defend, whether it be your intellectual property or your identity at home or in a business environment, the likelihood of you being able to protect that intellectual capital, if you do not have the proper defense mechanisms and countermeasures in place, you're not going to be able to protect it. So, you know, as I said in the beginning, I'm the cyber defense guy. You know, you've got to put a premium on cyber defense. You've got to put a premium on your identity and your intellectual property, and the same in business. So there are, Director Easterly brought up the NIST framework. The NIST framework is complex, but it can also be used in a simpler way to establish controls that you can implement and maintain and monitor and test against to ensure that your cyber defenses are in place and working properly. But it's the hygiene process that, you know, that follows up once you have your cyber controls in place. Cyber hygiene, continuous monitoring, testing of your controls. You can't assume your controls are going to always be working because the environment changes. So put a premium on cyber defense.
Thank you, Gary. Well, in closing, can everybody give our panelists a big round of applause? Thank you.